Hello, I'm male feminist Anders Bloom, and because all lives matter here at Thorin's channel, I give you a big welcome.
When I see people discuss the role of the in-game leader, what he's meant to be doing in the game, or judging how he affected the result of the team, whether they won, whether they lost, you get lost in so much terminology, so many kind of shorthands that we have to make discussion quicker and to make macros out of concepts that people who are very familiar with the game or who've played the in-game at a high level as an in-game leader are going to be very familiar with, but fans will have just picked up on, or they'll understand like the surface aspect of a particular principle or concept, but maybe they don't understand how it applies or some deeper nuance to it. And so since this is one of those topics that I see used quite vitriolically for and against certain in-game leaders, certain players, depending on who fans like, I think it's one of the toughest aspects to discuss actually in terms of whether someone's doing their job well as an in-game leader. Like what I said before, okay, about terminology. So when it comes to the terminology of how to discuss teams, I mean, a lot of this comes from myself because I use a lot of the terminology, a lot of shorthand myself in my videos because I can't explain the same concept for 10 minutes just to set up another 20 minutes on a different concept. That's what I did in a lot of my early videos, which a lot of my early videos could be 40 minutes long, whereas nowadays they might be 15, 20 minutes for most topics because I've set up a base level of knowledge and understanding and my kind of way of modeling the game that people who are familiar with my videos understand, and therefore everything doesn't have to be explained again. So some of the terminology we often use to describe in-game leaders is we'll say, oh, they run a loose playing style, they run a tactical playing style. Now, that already causes problems because I feel like people get caught up semantically in thinking that everyone who runs a loose playing style has some similarities, everyone who runs a tactical playing style, like it's the same sort of thing, or even thinking it's a dichotomy, it's loose versus tactical, or if you are loose, you're loose, and if you're tactical, you're tactical. These things not only are a spectrum, like loose might be at this extreme end here, and tactical might be here, and a lot of teams are somewhere in the middle or somewhere over here, or just skewing one way or another. But even more so, in their own way, they're their own spectrum as a result. You can take just loose and put the most extreme loose in-game leader and the one that's loose but still runs something of a certain system or runs it around one player particularly. And you could set up a whole discussion just around that. You could narrow in on that. You could get the magnifying glass out and find a lot of interesting distinctions between people in that sense. In fact, maybe I will in some future videos because I'll give you some quick examples to break down how that concept works. Because even when you go into tactical elements, like don't ever confuse tactics and strategy. Strategy, the overall picture of what we're going to do, what general tendencies we're playing with and against, where tactical is like the specific rounds and the specific things you want this person to do and a very specific call that someone does. Even that can be missed. So I'll give you a quick example. Fallen's SK Gaming of 2016, the one that won the two majors, like they will often be described as a loose playing style team because it was based a lot around individual playing moves or people making like two-player moves off each other, or once a round breaks down and the initial kills have gone, the initial utility's gone, then people making reads and making intelligent plays based off what they want to do. Right, that's loose. But in terms of strategical, yeah, this team had strategical elements to it. Certainly their understanding of what the opponent does, their understanding of what they're trying to do actually is much more in line with strategical play than it is specific tactical play. They didn't have a playbook of what they were going to do there, but they had the general sense to it and they could tweak that over time. Plus you got to add in, a team like that accomplished a lot of their success thanks to work done outside of the server, of teaching players things, of bringing them up, explaining what their role should be, practicing with them, showing them the small things that they're missing. That's one of the things they had to do with Phelps the next year when they got him in to replace SK. Then you go look at a team who I would never have personally called VP like a heavily tactical team, but you know what? They had a lot of different tactics. They had a lot of weird tactics, unique tactics that have a million different things that spawn off of them that you can't always read. Now that doesn't make them better than a very strictly tactical team like the very games of existence or North's MSL or Dignitas teams, or obviously Astralis now under Glaive. That doesn't make them better because they might have more weird tactics and they might have actually more overall tactics. It doesn't make them more tactical than them, who, you know, some of those teams, I mean, a great example would be like a North MSL team. Some of those teams might have run 3 or 4 tactics on a map over and over again with lesser players. And you know what, maybe they do well and they get 9 T rounds against a really world-class team. That doesn't make Virtus.pro better in terms of tactical execution than that team, or more of a tactical team, but you can see they're on a spectrum here. So one of the things that made me think about this, some of the misconceptions about the in-game leader role, is a very recent round that should be in everyone's mind who watched IEM 13 Chicago, which was the round in the semi-final on the deciding map when Astralis was facing Game Point on Fnatic's behalf. Fnatic was up 15-14. Fnatic was on the CT side of Inferno, and Fnatic was in a great spot to potentially win the game. But what happened was, as the round went on, Glaive called that they would go to the B site and they would do the Molotov execute, where you molly out the back area where the hole is, the dark spot, and you molly out the new box area, and basically then when you push in, you have your protocols of where people are going to have to be. Once they push out from there, you look towards the fountain, you have a guy that's smoked off the arch already, and the idea is, if you pull it off correctly, it's a nightmare strat to play against if you're on the B site, and then if the T's all know exactly where they need to look, and the players are in those locations, you can do what Astralis did here, which is basically just win the round off the execute alone, because at that point the retake is near impossible. It did work, and what do you know, Astralis got to overtime, and then from overtime they won the game. Therefore, that is the iconic signature play of that match, of that particular series, that really changed it. And obviously, since they went on to win the title, was one of those key players that changes everything and allows you to later on go on and actually win that championship. Now, what's funny is I saw that and I was like, God damn, what a great call. Like, what great execution. This is a great signature play. Like, just perfectly describes Astralis and the way they've been able to kind of enforce their tactical vision on the world, make the correct reads. Even when opponents have a sense of what's happening, it's very hard for them to react on the fly. To me, I was thinking, this is great stuff. Then I went around there and I looked around the community and I saw a whole bunch of people who were like, nah, this is nothing special. You know, it's an execute that a lot of teams have. Anyone can run it, you know. Like, we've seen it from a bunch of different teams. And you know what? They even got lucky, you know, with where the CTs were stood. And then that's where they needed them to be stood. And so that's why the round ended. So, like, you know, yeah, they're a good team, a great team and that. But yeah, let's not hype that round up at all. So basically, if you break down the reasons why people were kind of saying this wasn't that sick a round, they'd come down to this. It's not innovative or new. So, I'll give you a response to each one, shall I? So what would be the obvious point to say there? Like, so what? It worked. It was exactly the right call in that moment, and it worked flawlessly. Therefore, it doesn't matter that it wasn't new or that it wasn't innovative. You don't get any bonus points just for doing that. Sure, I guess in a way it'd be crazy if you could have come up with something completely invented, but that's so actually unrealistic that, again, this is why I've done the video, Misconceptions about the in-game leader. Like, I wonder what people think in-game leaders are doing in that scenario. Like, you're not making up a whole bunch of new players on the fly that you've never practiced before ever. Even, okay, I'll give you an example. In the NFL, someone like Peyton Manning ran a very unique, like, fast offense where he would just keep going. He wouldn't wait a long time for the coach to call stuff. He would like start the next play as well as soon as they got down there. That doesn't mean he was making up all the plays. He definitely had all of his receivers running certain routes, all the different concepts, was drilling them, he was watching a lot of film himself. It's just that he's running a faster approach to it, you know. So then let's look at another kind of aspect that people would say against it, which is, many different teams could do this. Many teams have done this round. Okay, but would those teams have called it at the exact right time in the round? Would they have called it at the right time in the game? Would they have been able to execute it while facing elimination from a massive tournament in the semi-finals where if you fuck it up, you look like an idiot? Would they have been able to do all this? I think most teams wouldn't, actually, and that's why you don't see them do it in that kind of scenario, and you don't see this happen as a big iconic play for them. Then you got the whole angle, which basically boils down to, like, you were lucky with the CT positioning. So does Glaive just get no credit whatsoever for reading the defense, maybe even having a sense of where they might be playing based on what they've done earlier in the game and demos he's scouted and tendencies that he's had researched from by Zonic? Does he not get any credit for knowing his own protocols and making sure his players are drilled on it, therefore they have their protocols down of where to look, when to look, who else is going to be looking somewhere else in an angle you don't have to cover? Then the opponent's protocols, will this particular player who rotates push through a smoke immediately? Will the smoke block him off and he'll go construction or wait for it to fade? Knowing all these things, or at least being able to guess at them, is this all just luck, is it? I always think, right, whenever someone thinks that very, very complicated things are just luck, it usually, to me, betrays, not that they're an idiot, but just a lack of nuanced understanding, lack of deep knowledge on that particular subject, and therefore, since you can only see the surface aspect and you boil it all down to a couple of factors, it seems like, it's kind of lucky, isn't it? You know, a lot of things had to go right in that scenario. It's like, well, let's break it down, you know. Did the person get to the position where they could get a lot of things go right just by tripping over and accidentally winning an awesome round to make the game go to overtime? Or is this someone where they have a history of being very well drilled, they have a team that understands exactly what they want to do, they've made a great call, they've figured out the whole game before that, figuring out all these other aspects, like what's the CT economy at this point in time, how many smokes do we have, what angles would they be likely to be playing, if they are playing those angles, how do we go into the site to make most use? You know, there's a million factors there that actually, if you look at them another way, make Glaive look even more genius, even though, yes, yes, he did not just invent this new Molotov on the fly in the last round of a fucking 3-game semi-final. No, that's pretty implausible to imagine he did, which is why I'm thinking, what do people think in-game leaders actually do in this game? It's kind of wild, right? Like, in that scenario, what more do you want for an iconic player from a team like Astralis? This is wild. I mean, go look, the best analogy, obviously, I always say the best analogy for Counter-Strike generally is basketball. It's a 5v5 game. Star players can have a lot of impact and carry the game. And once the initial part of a round breaks down, except for very, very good tactical teams who use a lot of great mid-round calls and have a deep playbook, a lot of what you're doing, actually, when you're down to 2 or 3 players, is just playing off each other and playing a lot individually, but then as a small team, a smaller unit. That's why I compare it to basketball. If you want to go and look at the in-game leader aspect, though, that's a lot more comparable to like an NFL offense. So in this kind of a world where you want a player to be innovative or new before you'll call it like a special player or a really great player, you know how few fucking big playoff games in the NFL are decided by some trick player or some player that no one's ever done before as the last play on the game-winning drive when they go to... No, you throw the play that makes sense. You throw the play that, with what you know about the offense, with what they've been doing so far on your team, with what you know about their defense and what their defense has been doing so far, and what's likely to actually win you this round, or in the case of NFL, just get you some yards and get you a touchdown. That's the play you call. You don't go, what's the craziest play ever that if I pulled it off, I'd be a fucking genius. No, that's that only a fan or someone watching a movie would think that way, I'm afraid. It's just the way these things go. So for me, when you talk about in-game leader, you have to break it down like the style. So that means we have to have the idea of what they're trying to do, what their sense of how the game works. You can also tie philosophy into this. Then you've got their personnel fit, not personal fit, personnel. Who do they have on their team? Depending on who you have, you're not going to be able to do certain things, or it's going to be quite obvious you should do other things. In the same way as you could have the best passing quarterback in the NFL, but if you've got a godlike running back who just can't be stopped, you'd be an idiot to just pass it all game long. You give it to that guy as much as you can, and then you actually use the other guy as the insurance oftentimes, or as the fake. Now, this is an example, again, of where people aren't looking at the context of a team. They're looking as though an in-game leader or a quarterback is just playing one-on-one and he's not got a whole team around him and a whole team against him. Like, there are so many extra variables that we have to look for the common denominator of what the in-game leader or the quarterback's doing, not the specific play and the outcome only. If we're results oriented, we're not going to get very far in judging these guys. Then you've got the whole angle of innovation that people brought up. Now, I've talked about this in the past. It's always been a bugbear for me because I think that innovation gets overvalued in practically every esports game. Mainly because if you pull off a really brand new move, something that no one's ever seen, or something that in the moment is spontaneous and genius, it's going to look fucking awesome. And yes, it gets points. And for creativity, it gets a lot of points. But the way people will seemingly always give the edge to that over a really great player that's like maybe not even that difficult in terms of how it's set up. It's got a simple concept behind it. The execution has to be like good, but maybe not godlike to make it work. And it works sometimes, as you see. Maybe it looks like you got lucky and you just called the right thing and he was doing the wrong thing. And you can't know inside that player's brain whether or not he really knew the other guy was doing the wrong thing. I have to say, though, as a general rule, though, while you value spontaneity, creativity, innovation, I actually think at the highest level, we're talking about the truly world-class, all-time great players and teams, what wins them the game, in this particular sense, and in my opinion, is more impressive, is refining a tactic that might not be yours, refining a move that someone else came up with, but you can now do better than him. When you make his move your move, as Astralis have done with this round over any, fucking Big did that round 2 months ago in an online game. Who gives a shit? We're going to remember Astralis is doing it this particular time, even though, yes, you shouldn't say they invented it. So instead, I prefer refinement. I prefer execution, knowing a simple move, but being able to execute it exactly and therefore get the most effective result out of it. In my opinion, that tops innovation in most cases. Because generally, the in-game leader, in my opinion, his main job is to call effective strategy, is to implement effective tactics that make that strategy become a tangible thing in the game and therefore hopefully win his team rounds. But it's not necessarily win his team rounds. It's put his team in a position to win rounds with their players and versus the players he's playing against. It's not really that much about whether he's unique or he's innovative and the player that he calls. It's about how effective he is, how efficient he is with what he's trying to do. And that's one of the other factors I alluded to there that I want to make the point of. It's not about whether you win the round as to whether it was the right call or whether the strat is good or whether, I mean, strat's the problem, isn't it? It should really be called tactic. Whether the tactic's good or whether the overall general strategical approach was correct. Like, you can definitely call a bunch of bad tactics for what the strategical read that was correct, and it might even win you the game. You can have the wrong strategical read, call a bunch of great tactics, sometimes win a game. Does that mean you were right? See, you can have made mistakes and you could have been rewarded for it. You can make the right call and you can do it badly. There's a lot of different ways that this kind of shit can break down. That's why it's so tough to gauge the in-game leaders, because, like I said, just because you won the round doesn't mean the strat was great. But you know what? It's kind of like, as I say, with quarterbacks, you don't judge them only on the spontaneous play they made or some crazy deep ball bomb, like Hail Mary, last seconds of the game thrown if someone made it and, oh, look, he got it and he did it. No, the best quarterbacks, even the greatest passers of all time, what's great about them is they also make loads of easy and obvious passes and just simple ones that get you 13 yards and a nice little run at one point in the game and just move the yards along, move the chains. That's all they're trying to do at times. So when we look at the in-game leader, we're talking about someone who sets up his playbook, who reads the opponent, who calls the best players for his team and versus that specific team and in this situation. That's the very key context that I evaluate how well he did his job and how well they played this particular game. From this, we can judge him. Because he can't play for the players. He can get them into a great position and they could lose a 1v1, they can lose a 2v3, he might die, they might do a stupid move, they might push on out somewhere that he didn't tell them to do. He can't make them play the game exactly the way he wants to. He can't stop fluke incidents, a flash that actually is mistimed by the CTs and they accidentally get a benefit from it, or someone just pushes up randomly, or someone just gets hit by a nade in a weird way that normally doesn't happen because the way it clips on the wall or something. Again, he can't call players better than what his team is capable of. A big pet peeve of mine in many teams, and there's a lot of good in-game leaders that I respect who I've given this criticism to before, is sometimes they're calling tactics that are just too good for their personnel. Like, it might have been the right read on the opponent. It might be the right thing in terms of like objectively the best call you could make, what they're calling now, but their team can't consistently execute that, or they're not going to in this particular situation, and that's a failure. If he could have called a simpler thing that maybe isn't as much of a counter and a hard killer to what the opponent's doing, but might have been able to work better for your particular personnel who maybe fit that kind of style better than they do the one you're currently doing. So there is so much nuance to this position. I think it's actually the most nuanced position in the entire game. I mean, I've explained in the past, part of it's because they have to do a lot of other aspects like manage practice, be the general manager, picking out the players that join the team. A lot of factors are being an emotional captain and leading, things that actually shouldn't have to be the in-game leader, but they end up having to do that. So it's one of the toughest roles in the game, and that's why, compared to most other roles, I think you should give them the most leeway, and you should try and take into account as many factors as possible, not discount as many factors as possible, reduce it to one or two, and then just judge them based on that. Did they win the game? Oh, good or bad? How many championships do they have? Good or bad? You know, no one knows how many players they had, what was going on in the game. They might have called 10 great T rounds, but they only got 3 rounds out of it because of the way the game ended up playing out, or they're playing a better opponent. There's so much nuance, and a lot of what we do as people analysing the game, whether it's me on this show here, whether it's someone on Reddit, whether it's some commentator, a lot of what we're having to do is guesswork, because we're having to theory craft. We're having to put together the pieces of things we know or think we know. Doesn't mean we shouldn't do that. Doesn't mean we shouldn't discuss it. I mean, there's value to that as well. It's entertainment and it's obviously insightful in its own manner. But it's a lot harder with the in-game leader than it is gauging just an individual player's performance, or whether he did a specific play correctly. This video was kindly supported by Andreas, Snazore, Westerlund, Dean Tanglis, Gardner Wilson, Landon Thompson, Tobias Bernasconi, OllieJ, NateDOhDoubleG, Kyla Harris, Travis Greb, Daniel Yordanov, James Harding, VeXii, Robert Baxter, Lucas Kerza, Szczesny. And a special thanks, as always, goes out to my man, Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest to feature in my upcoming content? Perhaps you want to ask me a question in my monthly AMA. Do you want teasers from my upcoming content? See who the next guests are going to be. Perhaps you'd like to take part in a discussion about esports with me. Well, any and all of the above exclusives are available for my patrons, so put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today at the Patreon link below.